that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
And with that, almost 10 years of hunting the world's most wanted man came to an end. Osama bin Laden is dead. The biggest victory for the United States in its fight against Al-Qaeda since 9/11. How did they do it? What's actually been achieved? And how does it affect the US in the region? The end of Osama bin Laden. This is Inside Story. Hello everyone, I'm Kamal Santamaria. Welcome to a special edition of Inside Story marking the death and analysing the impact of one Osama bin Laden. 9 years, 7 months and 22 days ago his name became headline news after the deadly attacks on New York and Washington, which became known simply as 9/11. Now he is dead, killed by US forces in Pakistan, his body apparently disposed of at sea. A quick and dramatic end to a life which affected so many parts and people of this world. We've got a lot of things that need to be discussed and clarified about this news, but first we want to look back at some of the key events of the life of Osama bin Laden. We start in the 1980s. He travelled to Afghanistan to fight the Soviet invasion, helping to funnel money and recruit fighters for the war. But it wasn't until August of 1988 that, along with Ayman al-Zawahiri and others, he formed the Al-Qaeda group. After the war, he returned to his homeland, Saudi Arabia, but in April of '94 was stripped of his Saudi nationality and relocated to Sudan. 2 years later, he was reported to have left Khartoum, this time for Afghanistan, where the Taliban gave him shelter. And that, of course, is where more recent history took its formative steps. For example, February 1998, bin Laden issues a decree declaring all American citizens are legitimate targets of Al-Qaeda and asking Muslims to perform their, quote, duty by killing them. He followed through on the threat 6 months later in Africa. Simultaneous attacks on the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. They killed 223 people and represented the first major attacks attributed to bin Laden's Al-Qaeda. Then Yemen 2 years later. We're at October 2000 by now, when the American destroyer USS Cole was rammed by a smaller vessel carrying explosives in the port of Aden. 17 sailors were killed. Significant attacks, all of them, but they would be overshadowed on the 11th of September 2001, hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, killing nearly 3,000 people. Bin Laden himself was in Afghanistan at the time. The result was, of course, a US-led invasion of Afghanistan in October of the same year. And since then, bin Laden has been on the run until now, of course. Let's get into this. Here is our panel for today. In Birmingham, Scott Lucas. He is the editor of Enduring America Worldview and a professor of American Studies at the University of Birmingham. In Islamabad, via broadband, is Hamid Gul, former head of the ISI, Pakistan's intelligence service. And rounding out our panel here in Doha is Ahmed Zaidan, the Pakistan bureau chief with our sister channel Al Jazeera Arabic and the author of the book Bin Laden Unmasked. Gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time on what is a very, very significant day and very, very significant topic. I want to start with some basic, brief reactions from you. If, like me, you woke up and heard the news, Scott Lucas, what was your initial reaction?
Surprise. You knew it was going to happen one day, but it was very sudden. Really had no indication it was going to come about. And then immediately after the surprise, immediately thinking, what next? Not necessarily what next in terms of bin Laden, because I think in many ways he's yesterday's man. Thinking what next in terms of reactions in the region, especially in Pakistan, but beyond. And then also thinking of the reactions in the United States, whether or not Americans were going to just simply celebrate this news, whether they were going to effectively think back to 9/11, or whether in fact they actually were going to reflect on what has gone on not only during the so-called war on terror, but what has been going on beyond it.
Really good points, all of those. Hamid Gul, let's go to you. What was your initial reaction?
Well, initially it was quite a shock because he was found to be in Pakistan, and that too in a crowded city, which is basically a military city, because there are a lot of military training institutions in that area. So it was quite a surprise. But when I reflected back on it, most of the big names of Al-Qaeda were caught in Pakistan from the cities like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Al-Libby, etc., those who were handed over to America. They were, I think they found good safe havens in the cities rather than out open in the wild western borders of Pakistan. So I think the drone attacks which the Americans were mounting for over the years from 2004 onward, I think they had no impact at all on Al-Qaeda because Al-Qaeda bigwigs were, after all, in the cities. And I think this has proven the point. But it's a great advantage for Obama, who is to run for his re-election next year. I think the first salvo goes in his favor. The first gambit goes to him. It's going to be trouble for Pakistan. And of course, the legend of Osama bin Laden has resurfaced. He's going to live, I think, the ghost of Osama bin Laden will continue to lurk in the corridors of various capitals and the world as a whole, because I think he challenged the global imperialism in a way, and he had diminished into some kind of a background, but the way he was killed, he stood up, fought, and I think one helicopter was also brought down. His wife came in front of him to save him, acted as a human shield. She was killed too. I think this is the stuff that stories are made of. The ballads and the folklore is made of such kind of stuff. And I think the phenomena of Al-Qaeda will get a boost from this rather than be hurt very badly.
And Ahmed Zaidan, a reporter in Islamabad for 10 years with Al Jazeera, you happen to be in Doha when this happens. I better know what your reaction was.
In fact, it is a victory, no doubt about it. It's a victory for Obama, but it's a big defeat and big debacle for Pakistanis. I don't know how the Pakistan is going to handle this issue because, you know, to violate the Pakistani sovereignty by the drone attack, it was to some extent acceptable to some Pakistani people. But now we came to know that this operation is taking place only just 100 kilometers away from Islamabad, where the Kahota and nuclear, reactor is there. So I don't know how the Pakistani government is going to justify these things and how they are going to present it to its people. Particularly, you know, we witnessed Parvez Musharraf as a military dictator, military ruler who ran the country for 10 years, and he did not allow American, at least obviously, to act foot soldiers inside Pakistani territory. But now, in the term or in the time of elected government, we saw that, you know, these foot soldiers are coming very close to Islamabad.
Gentlemen, you've all touched on the issue that I wanted you to, and that's the actual operation itself. And I think we should go through some of that. And I've got in my hand here briefing notes from the White House as they talked to reporters through actually what happened. A quote from a senior administration official who said, "We shared our intelligence on this bin Laden compound with no other country, including Pakistan." Scott Lucas, I guess history would prove America to be right in that sense. Kept it close, got the job done.
I think in a narrow sense, you can see why. That they, even last week, the head of the American military, Mike Mullen, was actually openly accusing Pakistani intelligence of having links to insurgents in Afghanistan. But your guest brings up the more important political point, and that is, in effect, you know, this happened on Pakistani soil. This happened nominally with the Pakistani government is supposed to be an ally of the U.S. in fighting insurgency. How do you explain that away? Effectively, America has unilaterally gone in and carried this off. And that, I think, comes back to my point, which is we're beyond bin Laden now. I mean, the man is dead. But the issues now are issues of, for example, the relationship between the U.S. and the Pakistani government, and perhaps more importantly, between the U.S. and the Pakistani people. How do they react to this notion of what was a war on terror, but in some ways, you know, you're dealing with local Pakistani issues that have gone way beyond that supposed war that started 10 years ago.
Hamid Gul, was it right to keep the Pakistanis out? It happened on their soil. There's so much tension between the countries over cooperation, over terrorism and the like. Was it right to keep them out in the end?
Well, both countries and their military establishment as well as the intelligence establishment, they were suspicious of each other. And that was quite an open secret until it blew up in the case of Raymond Davis, who killed CIA contractor, who killed 2 Pakistanis in broad daylight in a very busy marketplace back in Lahore. And this is what brought the 2 agencies face to face almost. So Jal Pasha was summoned to America and he had talks with Leon Panetta, but it didn't seem to work out. So now the question is not only the sovereignty of Pakistan, but also the security of Pakistan. If Pervez Musharraf had allowed these people bases inside Pakistan, and surely these helicopters must have flown from somewhere around what is known as Tarbela Ghazi base, which was loaned to the Americans. I think they have misused that, and they did not take Pakistan government into confidence. In the past, we have always had people caught by the ISI, and ISI cooperated fully with the American intelligence. But this time they decided to go it alone. And I think now this raises the question whether our security installations are safe from the raids by the American invisible warriors here who are hiding inside Pakistan, or they have the.
Let's bring in Ahmed Zaidan, because I saw you nodding there in agreement with what Hamid was saying.
Definitely. Now, I think the big problem in front of Pakistan is, number one, is the security of Pakistan, how the Pakistani people are going to feel secure after this operation, number one. Number two, how the elected government, like People Party government, is going to, justify these attacks inside Pakistan territory. Number three is the Pakistani military establishment and also security establishment. I don't know how they are going to, justify it for Pakistani people, particularly, after the announcement by the American officials that they have done it without any cooperation with the Pakistani officials, or even without sharing this information with the Pakistani security officials. It is very obvious for us as a journalist based in Islamabad that for the long time that there is not easy cooperation or relation between ISI and the CIA, and the visit by Ahmed Shuja Basha, the director of ISI, to Washington 2-3 times for the last a few weeks showed that there is some sort of uneasy cooperation between both institutions, particularly after the so much popular people upset vis-a-vis the drone attacks in a tribal area. Now it depends on American side, the ball in the court of the American, how they are going to justify to Pakistani people, how they are going to offer some sort of big, some sort of concessions to Pakistani people, Pakistani government, whether they are going to stop these drone attacks or whether they are going to do something in Afghanistan to withdraw their troops from Afghanistan in order to appease Pakistani people.
And that is a point I want to look at in a moment. First of all, I want to stay with this idea of the perhaps lack of cooperation, shall we say. We've looked at that, the Americans not involving the Pakistanis, and going to an area which we might be surprised at. It's really remarkable in the end how close to the Pakistani capital Osama bin Laden was, killed just outside Abbottabad, only 100 kilometres from Islamabad, as we heard. He lived along there, the Kakul Road, which leads from the city to one of Pakistan's main military training academies. This is the area where his mansion was situated and where the attack took place. Quick word from Ahmed Zaidan before I go back to Scott Lucas in Birmingham on the fact that we've all thought, anecdotally at least, that Osama bin Laden would be hiding in a cave somewhere, and indeed Tora Bora was mooted for such a long time, and now he appears to have been in a suburban area, Ahmed Zaidan.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I agree with General Hamid Gul, that most of the Al-Qaeda operative, most of Al-Qaeda commanders who have been arrested or killed in Pakistan, they have been killed in main cities, whether it was in Faisalabad or Karachi or Rawalpindi or now in Abbottabad, because Al-Qaeda operative, Al-Qaeda leaders, maybe they were feeling more secure in Pakistani cities, and they were thinking that definitely the American or Pakistani will never ever think that these people are going to live in this area rather than a tribal area. Now I think in front of the United States there are a very important moments they have to catch it. Number one is there are two models for Arab people for change in their country. Either the people revolutions like what happened in Yemen, or what's happening in Yemen, or Egypt or Tunisia or Syria, or the people will think if such model did not succeed, maybe they will go back for the model of Osama bin Laden. I think now it's up to the United States whether they are going to support the people options in Syria or in Yemen or in Libya, or the people will think again about the Osama bin Laden model.
Scott Lucas, Ahmed Zaidan has brought up the point about what the United States does next, and you've mentioned it already as well, Scott. It's not a case of we got our man, move on after a war. There is still so much to be done, and just because you take the head off the beast doesn't mean it still can't operate.
Now, I think there's three interesting areas that I'll be watching in the next few days to see what the Americans do. I think one which your previous guest mentioned, which is sort of the very broad issue, is whether the United States sort of takes a look not only at Afghanistan and Pakistan, but at the Middle East, at North Africa, and basically starts to emphasize support for the people's movement, support for political rights, and de-emphasizes an emphasis on military action, especially action to take out, top bad guys. But I think there's the second area, much closer to Pakistan, is Afghanistan. Is the United States going to use this, specifically, is President Obama going to use this as an opportunity to say, look, we've gotten rid of Osama bin Laden, we've basically decapitated Al-Qaeda, let's now seriously talk about withdrawing from Afghanistan? Because the rationale has always been, oh, there's still extremists in Afghanistan, there's still Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, that's why we have to have 100,000 troops there. Does Obama try to create the space to de-escalate? If he doesn't, if the Americans continue to push the military option in Afghanistan, I think they lose whatever benefit they're going to try to claim from today. Third, perhaps most importantly, most immediate, what do they do in Pakistan? There has to be some alternative to be held out to the idea of the U.S. as a big military force in Pakistan. My impression is that most Pakistani people don't want to see that type of American cooperation. They'd rather see an American cooperation on political, economic development, and one which is much more supportive than confrontational. Do the Americans recognize it? What do they do next, if they do, to show that face rather than the face of the helicopter gunships and the special forces?
Ahmed Zaidan, why don't I put it to you? What does, and as Scott makes the point, what happens in the very immediate future, because it is a delicate time?
Absolutely, it's a very delicate time. I agree with my colleague. I think the best time for the United States now to announce, as I mentioned before, to do some concession for Pakistan and for Afghani. Now it's very clear for Afghan people that, Osama bin Laden was not in Afghanistan, and most of, or all of Al-Qaeda commander or leaders or operatives who have been killed or arrested in Pakistan. So there is no justification for American troops or presence of American troops in Afghanistan. That's why I think Americans should do something for Pakistani or for Afghani, and not to feel so much proud in this moment, because I think it will have very bad repercussion on the Pakistani people or Afghani people, or at large among the Muslim people. So what I'm suggesting, what I'm saying, that if United States can put some sort of timetable or go with the same timetable which they have initiated, that to withdraw from Afghanistan at the beginning of July, and to also to appease Pakistani people, or to mend their relation with the Pakistani government. I don't know to which extent they can mend their relation now with whether it is with the military institution or with the security institution. I think this is the biggest challenge in front of the United States in the coming weeks or coming months.
Gentlemen, here's a topic we haven't addressed so far, the issue of reprisal attacks. And it relates back to the theme of this show, which is what America has done here, what the United States has done here, and what it needs to do in the future. It needs to go on, obviously, a very, very high alert, not just at home, but in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan. Scott Lucas.
I've got a colleague here in Birmingham, Steve Hewitt, who's one of the best people on counterterrorism. And his point for months before this has been that we aren't talking about big Al-Qaeda reprisal operations, big boom operations. We're talking about small, decentralized operations, often involving a few people, often involving a very limited target. This has happened in Britain. This has happened in Europe. It's happened throughout the Middle East. Those are the small operations that local security forces have been trying to counter now for months by getting intelligence, by getting information to either thwart them or to basically, to limit the significance of any attack. And they largely have been successful. So in terms of this immediate question, will there be a big immediate reprisal? I don't think the core Al-Qaeda movement in Pakistan really has the power to do this. I think the spin-off movements, if you want to call them that, or the local movements who may have basically drawn inspiration from Al-Qaeda, I think there may be some attempts at reprisal attacks, but I don't really think they have the planning in the organization to pull off anything significant.
And presumably
they have been countered not by...
Sorry, Scott, presumably they won't lose any inspiration.
They, in fact, have not been countered by the big American military force. They haven't been countered by the big American military force. They've been countered by local intelligence forces. And I think they have to draw, if they are to sustain themselves, on local conditions. I think bin Laden is a false figurehead.
Ahmed Zaidan, where would you be looking right now if we're talking about risky areas now, reprisal attacks, fears for attacks against Americans? Where do you think it would happen?
In fact, there is a potential, if there is a potential, what you call a threat or potential group which can, react or retaliate for that, I think Pakistani Taliban, they have that potential threat, number one, and number two, maybe the Al-Qaeda in, Morocco or Algeria. And I don't know how much Al-Qaeda can do something, if they can do something in a state or Western countries. But I think, again, that Pakistani Taliban, maybe they are the best potential, option for Al-Qaeda to take revenge, particularly because, Taliban of Pakistan, they have, the manpower. Maybe they have some Pakistanis abroad in the Western countries. They can do, they can take retaliation or they can take revenge. But of course, once the head is cut, so you can't expect anything from the limbs or from the hands or from the legs, how the reaction will be.
You make the point about the head being cut. Where's the new head? Is it simply Ayman al-Zawahiri?
In fact, so far, the head of Al-Qaeda is, as you know, that everybody knows it's Osama bin Laden, and Ayman al-Zawahiri, he is a deputy of Osama bin Laden. But I don't know, again, whether they are going to choose Ayman al-Zawahiri or they are going to choose somebody else, or whether the other, splintered group of Al-Qaeda in different countries will accept him or not. But I think it is a matter of wait and see to see whether Al-Qaeda is going to elect Ayman al-Zawahiri or not.
Scott Lucas, your thoughts on that?
I think al-Zawahiri will be at least the person we'll look for who will make the immediate statements. The question, however, is that beyond, this ideological statements, the claims of martyrdom from bin Laden, where's the organizational planning going to come from, even within Pakistan? Even if you try to claim, a relationship between Al-Qaeda and other groups like the Pakistani Taliban, where is it going to happen? I'm sorry, I don't want to be completely dismissive of Al-Qaeda, but I think far more important than the issue of Al-Qaeda's organization will be, as your previous guest noted, will be how Pakistani groups respond, how they reshape the way that they present their issues. And I think in Pakistan, the recent violence we've seen, the killing of ministers, the attacks on the terrorist attacks have been much more to do with local Pakistani politics and local Pakistani issues than they do with the broad campaign that al-Zawahiri and bin Laden tried to promote more than a decade ago.
Final word from Hamid Gul in Islamabad. We've been talking about succession, if you like. Ayman al-Zawahiri would be the nominated person, I guess, to go to the head of Al-Qaeda. What will happen next with him in charge, presumably?
While Ayman al-Zawahiri does not have the same soft corner which Osama bin Laden had for Pakistan, and he's been talking against Pakistan and its policies, so I think Pakistan will be squeezed from both ends. Al-Qaeda may go on a revenge spree, join up with the Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan, who are already creating havoc inside the cities and bazaars of Pakistan, and then they'll be squeezed from American side, and there will be demand on Obama that Pakistan should be chastised. But I think Obama will have a very difficult choice to make, because if he is to withdraw from Afghanistan, and now after having killed Osama bin Laden, he can at least say that the mission for Afghanistan is accomplished. So in the IF Pak battlefield area, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, the mission is over, and they can start withdrawing on the announced date, that is beginning July. But as far as Pakistan is concerned, now they would say that Pakistan is a hub of terrorists, and they are harboring here, and therefore Pakistan needs to be cleansed. But then Pakistan is the relief zone, the only relief zone available to America for withdrawing their troops from Afghanistan, and they cannot go all the way to bash Pakistan. Pakistan will have to be somehow taken on board. And for Pakistani government, it has to be answerable to the people of Pakistan.
Okay, Hamid Gul. Hamid Gul, thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry I have to interrupt you there, but thank you for your time. That was Hamid Gul, who's the former head of the ISI in Pakistan. Also Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies at Birmingham University, and Ahmed Zaidan, Al Jazeera Arabic's correspondent in Pakistan, joining us here from Doha. Thank you, gentlemen. This has been a special edition of Inside Story, one of two, looking at the death, the life, the impact of Osama bin Laden, part of continuing coverage here on Al Jazeera with comprehensive global reaction to this news. I'm Kamal Santamaria. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again soon.